Until I was around 25 years old, I lived in a coastal town. My neighborhood was roughly a 20-minute walk from the shore, and honestly, the beach shaped most of who I was. I had been surfing for as long as I could remember, even before I could properly talk, and it was rare for me to shake out a pair of shoes without sand spilling out. My two closest friends, who I will call Armand and Chuck, were both outgoing, confident, and full of energy. We were all 18 at the time and completely fixated on girls. It was a Saturday night toward the end of May, just a few weeks before school ended. We had all checked out mentally by then. Senioritis had taken over, and we constantly tested how far we could push things without getting into trouble. Since we had already received our college acceptances during COVID, high school no longer felt important. Armand and I had plans to meet up with two girls from school that we had been getting along with really well. The idea was to pick them up in the evening and spend a calm, breezy night by the ocean. We brought blankets and a couple bottles of wine, which felt like the perfect setup for stargazing. I am not proud of it, but I was young and careless. I pulled up to Sophia's house a little after 9. She and Fran came out and made their way to the car in a playful, slightly unsteady way. It was obvious they had already been drinking a bit. Armand and I exchanged excited looks. The night was shaping up to be fun. I chose a scenic route to a quieter beach, about a 30-minute drive away. The entire ride was filled with laughter, jokes, and conversations about mutual friends. At one point, Fran and I got into a surprisingly deep discussion about time, death, and other philosophical ideas. Everyone was enjoying themselves. The beach I had picked had a dirt path that cars could drive up. From there, a narrower sandy trail led down to the shore. The path was steep, but I chose it because it was more secluded and we were less likely to run into anyone. It was also farther from the main boardwalk, so the sky would be clearer for stargazing. I had planned everything carefully. I parked as far up the dirt road as I could, and we all got out. Armand and I carried the blankets and wine. Skipping ahead a bit, after a few hours and an empty bottle, Armand and I ended up splitting off. He and Fran walked one way along the beach, while Sophie and I headed in the opposite direction. After we had put some distance between us and the others, I laid down the blanket, and we ended up drunkenly dozing off together. Just before anything more happened, Sophia suddenly stiffened. At first, I thought I had done something wrong, but then she whispered, "Do you hear that?" I paused and listened carefully, trying to focus past the steady sound of the waves. At first, I assumed she was imagining things, but then I heard it too. It was a faint mechanical sound, like a small engine humming. The noise seemed to move around, making it hard to tell where it was coming from. Then it slowly faded away. "It is nothing," I told her, brushing it off and trying to get back to what we were doing. And we did. A little while later, I picked up my shirt from the sand and shook it out before putting it back on. Right then, Sophia suddenly screamed. I turned toward her and saw her pointing upward. I looked up, but saw nothing except the dark sky. I sat down beside her to get a better angle, and that is when I saw it. From where she was lying, the moon lined up perfectly with what looked like a drone hovering directly above us. It stayed there for a moment before quickly shooting upward and disappearing into the darkness. Everything clicked. The sound we had heard earlier was definitely that drone. I felt stupid for not realizing it sooner. Then a wave of disgust hit me as I thought about the possibility that we had been watched the entire time. I looked at Sophia and could tell she felt the same. She buried her face in her hands and started crying. I tried to comfort her and suggested we head back to the car. When we got there, Armand and Fran were already waiting. I explained what had happened as quickly as I could. They were stunned, and the mood completely shifted. The excitement from earlier was gone. I started driving towards Sophia's house in silence, eventually trying to start a conversation to lighten things up, but it did not help. The girls said they did not feel safe going home yet. Since it was Saturday night, I did not mind staying out. I asked if we could hang out at either of their places, but they both said their parents would not allow it. My house and Armin's were not options either, so I asked Armin to call Chuck. His house was huge, and his parents were very relaxed. It seemed like the best choice. Luckily, Chuck was free. We pulled into his driveway. Armin and the girls walked toward the front door, and I told them I would be there in a moment. I needed time to process everything. I was more shaken than I let on. I leaned forward, resting my forehead on the steering wheel, and closed my eyes to calm myself. After a few seconds, I felt slightly better. Without thinking, I picked up my phone, which I had not checked since the beach. The screen lit up, showing a single notification. I blinked a few times, thinking I might be mistaken. Then it hit me. My entire body froze as I read the words on the screen. AirTag found moving with you. All the fear I had tried to push away came rushing back. We had been tracked. I jumped out of the car and started searching it frantically. I checked the front bumper, the grille, and the back. Nothing. I moved inside, checking under the seats and lifting the floor mats. Still nothing. Panic set in. Sweat ran down my neck, and my skin felt tense. I dropped to the ground and started inspecting underneath the car. When I reached the driver's side wheel, I felt around the wheel well, and there it was. It had been taped underneath, hidden so well that you would never notice it unless you were specifically looking. I held it for a moment before throwing it down and smashing it. Whoever had been watching us on the beach knew exactly where we were. I did not feel safe standing alone in Chuck's driveway. I grabbed a piece of the broken AirTag and ran to the front door. I told everyone what I had found and showed them the pieces. They were even more terrified than I was, especially the girls. They checked their phones and saw the same notification. Chuck was furious, mainly because whoever had tracked us now knew where he lived. Once things settled a bit, we stayed in Chuck's basement for the rest of the night and ended up sleeping there. Weeks passed and nothing happened. Eventually, we tried to move on and forget about it. The only explanation we could come up with was that some creep had used a drone to watch us and then tracked our car for some twisted thrill. It was unsettling, but we were relieved it did not get worse. Then, about 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, Chuck called me in a panic and told me to come over immediately. I drove there right away. When I arrived, he was standing in his driveway, holding something in his hand and looking worried. At first I was confused, but then I realized what he was holding. They were photos. I looked closer and felt sick. They were pictures of me from that night on the beach. The images were grainy and dark, but it was obvious what they showed. Sophia and I were clearly visible in a very exposed situation. I felt disgusted and immediately thought about how Sophia would react. Not knowing what else to do, we called the police and explained everything. They told us there was not much they could do, but we insisted they at least check the photos for fingerprints. Later, they told us nothing was found. Sophia was terrified that whoever sent the photos might try to blackmail her, and I felt the same. The whole experience was deeply disturbing. Fortunately, nothing else ever came of it, possibly because we involved the police. Still, things were never the same. Sophia became distant with me afterward, and I could not blame her. Even now, I just hope those pictures never resurface later in my life. My best friend Ricardo and I were both 19 years old. Without trying to sound arrogant, we grew up in fairly comfortable families in North Jersey and spent our summers at the Jersey Shore. My place was in Belmer, New Jersey, and his was in Lavallette. One random weeknight, Ricardo was driving us from my house in Belmer to his place in Lavallette, which is about an hour away. To be honest, I usually liked hanging out at Ricardo's house more. Not just because it was a bit nicer, but also because Lavallette had more of a scene for people our age. If we were not looking for a party, We could always have a few drinks on one of the many private beaches we were technically not allowed to be on. I could go on about shore activities, but I will keep things focused and move ahead. While we were driving, we decided to take it easy that night. No parties, no hookups, none of the usual plans. We agreed to grab some beers, roll a joint, and relax on a quiet beach under the night sky. Honestly, it sounded perfect. We had been going pretty hard lately with friends, and a break from that lifestyle felt necessary. For anyone unfamiliar with Lavalette, it has both a beach side and a bay side. Most of the beaches have tall dunes and a sharp drop as you approach the ocean. If you stood by the water and looked back, you would see a large mound of sand rising behind you. After having a few drinks at Ricardo's house, we grabbed bikes from his garage and headed toward the beach. For some reason, Ricardo wanted to go farther than I had ever gone before. I did not really get why, since all the beaches looked similar to me. Still, I did not mind the longer ride, so I went along with it. Eventually, Ricardo picked a beach at the very end of a road that looked completely empty. There were no cars parked nearby, and every house on the street had its lights off. I actually liked that. At that time, weed was still illegal in New Jersey, and we definitely did not want to get caught. We also had drinks with us, even though we were only 19. We hid our bikes in some bush before heading onto the sand. We lit the joint and sat there under the stars. The only sounds were the gentle waves and the wind. The beach stretched endlessly in both directions, and the sand felt cool beneath our feet. As time passed, we got more drunk, laughing and talking nonstop. Eventually, we lay back on the sand, staring up at the sky, hoping to catch a glimpse of a shooting star. That was when we heard it. I noticed it first. It was extremely faint. The sound was like a metallic hum, similar to what you might hear in a huge gym with bright overhead lights. It is hard to describe it any better. It was a soft metallic vibration that clearly did not belong on a beach. I sat up and looked at Ricardo, and I could tell the exact moment he started hearing it too. We both turned our heads in every direction, trying to locate where the sound was coming from. Strangely, it was almost impossible to pinpoint. It was just too faint and unclear. We were starting to feel uneasy, but we were also too scared to move. We figured whatever it was would eventually go away and leave us alone. There was no way anyone could see us from where we were sitting. It was extremely dark, and the ocean noise easily covered any sound we might have been making. It may not sound that frightening, but my heart was racing. The humming continued, and after a few more minutes, Ricardo signaled for me to follow him. I nodded. Leaving felt like the smartest decision. But just like something out of a movie, the moment we stood up, the sound suddenly became much louder. I had to fight the urge to scream. The change was instant, not gradual. The noise jumped in intensity in a split second, and it was clearly coming from our right side. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise, and a surge of fear ran through my entire body. We stared into the darkness, but still could not see anything. The sound now felt so close that we instinctively began running toward the dune. I did not even know what we were running from. I only knew that something was very wrong, and it felt like something was after us. About halfway to the dune, Ricardo suddenly grabbed my shoulder and stopped me. At first, I did not understand why. Then I followed his gaze. I looked up toward the top of the dune and saw it. A dark figure stood completely still at the top. Its arms were unnaturally long, nearly reaching its knees. It was extremely tall, and what stood out most was how perfectly still it remained. It was terrifying. Ricardo yelled at me, snapping me out of it, and we started running again, this time along the shoreline. We reached the next entrance and rushed up the dune. As we climbed, we looked back at where we had been. What I saw next is something I will never forget. The original figure was still there, but now there were 3 or 4 more scattered along the dune. All of them stood motionless, and each one seemed to be facing us. We did not even think about going back for our bikes. We ran all the way home instead. The next morning, we went back to look for them, but we could not find them anywhere. Maybe someone stole them, or maybe whatever had been out there the night before had something to do with it. Either way, I have never experienced anything more frightening on a beach. To this day, I still cannot fully explain what happened. The strangest part for me is the sound. I was never able to figure out what that metallic hum was, and I have never heard anything like it again. Beaches didn't always scare me, but now they do. That fear comes from what I'm about to share. When I was younger, the shoreline was actually one of my favorite places. I spent countless summers looking forward to weekends when my family and I would stay at our beach house. Sometimes, if I got lucky, I'd stay at my friend Charles' place instead, which was always more exciting. I was 16 at the time, and this happened during one of those unforgettable summer weekends. It was just me, Charles, and our other friend Riley. We planned to spend a few days alone at Charles' beach house in LBI. Riley was a year older than us and had just gotten his driver's license, so he was the one taking us there. The ride itself was a blast. Riley wasn't the most skilled driver yet, so most of the trip was filled with us laughing as he swerved and complained about the road. Despite that, we made it there pretty quickly and started unloading our things into the rooms we'd be using. The layout of the house matters, so I'll explain it briefly. There was a front entrance, a garage door that connected the back and front yard, a sliding door at the back, and an upstairs deck that linked the bedrooms. There was also a spiral staircase leading from the deck straight down to the ground, giving access to the house from upstairs. The house sat along a lagoon, meaning the backyard faced a narrow stretch of water with other homes across from it. At our age, we were focused on meeting girls, and having a beach house to ourselves felt like the perfect setup. We spent some time figuring out who was nearby and reached out through Snapchat. Eventually, we connected with 3 girls who were willing to come hang out. Their names were Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie. I had brought enough weed for the weekend, and we had also taken a few bottles of alcohol from our parents before leaving. Everything seemed set. The night started off great. The girls were fun and flirtatious, and it was clear things were heading in a certain direction. At one point, all 6 of us decided to smoke by the small pool in Charles' backyard. It wasn't big, but it worked perfectly for us. I still remember the moment clearly. The soft breeze coming off the bay, the warm water steaming into the night air, mixing with the smoke drifting upward. At that age, it felt perfect. Then suddenly, Charles lowered the music completely and stared past me into the darkness over the lagoon. Confused, I turned to look. I could barely make out the houses across the water, and I didn't understand what he was focused on. One of the girls asked why he turned the music off, and he quietly said he saw someone standing on the dock across from us. I thought he was joking and started laughing. "Who cares? People live here," I said. But Charles shook his head and replied, "I know that family. They're in Florida this week." Even then, I didn't take it seriously, but the girls were clearly uneasy and wanted to go inside. I didn't argue, so we all started getting out of the pool. As we were drying off, Riley suddenly jumped and swore while staring toward the lagoon. We all turned, and even in the dim light, I could see movement coming from the opposite dock. We stood frozen, trying to figure out what we were seeing. Then a passing car briefly lit up the area, and what we saw was terrifying. There were 4 tall figures standing at the edge of the dock, facing directly toward us. We couldn't make out details, but there was no doubt they were looking at us. Charles, clearly shaken, told us to get inside immediately and motioned toward the sliding door. As we rushed in, I heard something I will never forget. 4 distinct splashes, one after another. They had jumped into the water and were swimming across the lagoon toward us. Panic hit instantly. The girls screamed. Riley slammed the sliding door shut and locked it, and Charles ran to secure the front door. We all gathered in a room that couldn't be seen from outside and waited in complete silence. Minutes passed, but we heard nothing. Then Riley suddenly cursed and admitted he had forgotten to lock the sliding door on the upstairs deck. Charles started panicking, realizing someone could already be getting inside. Right then, we heard soft footsteps coming from above us. That was enough. None of us had anything to defend ourselves, and we weren't exactly sober, so we decided to run. All 6 of us rushed out the front door and sprinted to the car. Riley started it immediately, but in the chaos, he smashed Charles' mailbox while backing out. Once we were far enough away, we called the police. The entire situation was a nightmare. After the police searched the house, we returned, only to find out how bad things really were. Everything valuable on the top floor was gone. But even worse, Charles' family boat, a Boston ware, had been stolen as well. It was likely used as their escape. Charles' father kept a spare key hidden in a small compartment beneath the steering wheel. The police believed that's how they managed to leave so quickly. What still bothers me is how they knew exactly where to find it. No one was ever caught, and it's unlikely anyone ever will be. We've always suspected it might have been someone familiar with Charles' family, someone who knew the house would be empty and where the key was hidden. It's been years since that night, but it left a lasting mark on me. Since then, I've made it a habit to lock every door and window in my home, without fail. Do yourself a favor. Lock your doors at night.